welcome you to my neighborhood, because as a small child, for the first years of my life, I lived about 3 blocks from here on 32nd Avenue South. And I enjoyed this beautiful view from our home here. And I spent the rest of my years growing up in the Rainier Valley, all the time going through Seattle Public K-12 schools and so forth. So I definitely remember this neighborhood and the beauty of the neighborhood here and our views. The only difference was, when I looked across the way, it was dark. There were no skyscrapers in Bellevue. And I represent the 41st District, which is 5 cities and 1 small town in East King County. I live in the city of Renton, and I represent Renton, Bellevue, Newcastle, Issaquah, and Mercer Island, and the little town of Beaux Arts. And it is definitely a different area than it was when I was a child. There are so many businesses over in East King County, a very thriving business community, from Boeing and Renton and all the way through Everett to the technology industry, and many, many more small businesses in East King County. I also represent 5 school districts in that area, and really school districts that people choose to live in, that people say, I want to be here because I feel that my kids are getting a good education and they're getting the support that they need in the neighborhoods and so forth. So my interest really is to ensure that our region and our state all has that same focus and that same opportunity for success. I was pleased to attend your Tabor 100 event last Saturday night, and also last year. So part of what I like to do is connect with all of my communities throughout the region, all of the people and interests and so forth, and just be a big part of the growing and diverse communities throughout the Puget Sound area. And it's a great event, and I look forward to attending next year also. I'd like to share with you a little bit about my background. The first career I had was in the banking business. I managed bank branches. I worked in that industry for 16 years. And then I decided that was enough corporate America. I needed to be a business owner and control a bit more of my time and earnings and so forth. For 21 years have owned a real estate business based out of Renton and working in South and East King County in all price ranges, but mainly in more affordable homes for first-time home buyers and move-up buyers and so forth. It's given me a great opportunity to get to know people and the concerns that they have, because my job every day of the week and every night, because that's what realtors do, is work 7 days a week, is to sit down at kitchen tables and talk to people about the concerns that they have, the commutes to work, the promotions that they got, the losses of their jobs, the schools that their kids are going to go to, divorces, deaths, marriages, whatever it was, and really have an opportunity to listen to needs that they have. And quite often those needs match the kinds of issues that we're dealing with in Olympia. I also served as a Renton School Board Director for 8 years, elected to 2 4-year terms. The Renton School District is a very diverse district, both ethnically and economically. We have about 50% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. Our students speak 87 languages. 40% of them are mobile every year. And there are many challenges and many things that are going very, very well. And I think that any of you who have some connections to some of the things happening in public schools right now, and maybe very closely are seeing some of the great improvements and opportunities that are happening in the Renton School District, which actually spans from Skyway all the way through South Bellevue with over 100,000 citizens and 14,000 students. So that, again, is a great background for me to have brought to the legislature. I was first elected 2 years ago to serve the 41st District, and actually I was the first person elected off of Mercer Island in 20 years. So we did discover that we have 5 cities in the 41st District, which I think is very wonderful and really helps bring different voices and so forth down to Olympia there. My focus in Olympia has been in education and economic development, and I serve as the Vice Chairman of the Education Policy Committee for K-12 education. I also serve on the Education Appropriations Committee for early learning, K-12 and higher ed. I serve on capital budget, and I serve on the Community Economic Development and Trade Committee as the Vice Chairman there also. I also have an appointment from the Governor on the Quality Education Council, which is the interim committee that works when we're not in session to help set and advise policies that will be implemented for education for each of the coming sessions. And that is an outcome of some of the work that we've done the last couple of years. So I think that the work that I do and the passions that I have really match the work that you do. And I'm so glad to see that. When I look at your website and I hear what you have to say about education opportunities and about economic vitality and about social justice, those are all things that for me are top priority and absolutely where I want to go with my work, and I think match my district also in their needs and concerns. So we have done, in the education area, we've done some very important work the last couple of years in basically bringing basic education policy into this century. It's work that hadn't been done for a number of decades, and it's not finished yet by far, as we know, because we have a lot of kids that need to be served and to have those opportunities to learn. We also, as we continue on with that work, we've done some work in early learning along the way. We've added some things into basic education as actually part of the constitutional policy that were outside of that area. Some of the things like full-day kindergarten, which we know gives a great and tremendous start to so many children and really helps level that playing field, give them that start, helps us get away from and hopefully do away with the opportunity gaps that are there at this point in time for too many kids. Let's see, what else to tell you about? In the area of economic development, some of the things that we've done with the changes to the State Department of Commerce, with some contracting for small businesses with the state, many small pieces that we're doing along the way. And all of these things during 2 very challenging years. I guess if I could have chosen to go to Olympia at different times, I might have, but typically the way I work is I roll up my sleeves and say, this is definitely a challenging time, and we're going to work hard and get things done and survive and thrive in the end. And I have a philosophy that if you work with and for kids, you better look ahead to a brighter future and make it happen, because that's our next generation, and it's too important not to look after all of them.
If I could ask you a couple of questions, Marcie, just to you touched on something a second ago that I think might really interest our members. And you made a reference to the Office of Women Enterprises and perhaps a relationship with the Department of Commerce. Could you talk a bit more about what that is?
Sure. Well, just to share with you first of all, some of the work that we do with the Department of Commerce was really to help focus on business, rather than just the Department of Commerce was this big bucket that had so many different focuses, and definitely was originated to focus on business, but wasn't necessarily, I would say, headed that direction fully. One of the things that I've done in the interim is really follow along and be a part of many of the opportunities that our director, Roger Sweet, has had to get out into the communities and talk to business people and hear what their concerns and needs are. Some of the things that we have done and need to do even more of in making sure that our rules and regulations aren't too difficult for businesses, because they can be, so they really can be very, very stifling for small businesses and so forth. I talked a little bit about contracting to ensure that we're able to allow our smaller businesses to compete with larger businesses with many of the contracts that come available through the state and so forth. So there's a lot more, again, to do in that direction. One of the concerns that we've had, and I know so many small businesses have had, is the tax on gross receipts. And in fact, we had a bill on the table in 2009, but when you can't replace those funds at the moment, it's really hard to do that bill. So again, we've got to figure out ways to make those things happen, but there's plenty more.
And one more follow-up on something you said, the is taking on the topic. She talked about your focus on education. And given the governor's recent executive order and what it's going to be, a revision of the budget, downward revision that's going to affect dramatically education funding and college slots, how is the state going to, under those circumstances, achieve one of its highest priorities of providing for the best education possible for Washingtonians. Did you address that for a second?
Maybe I can talk about K-12 and higher ed a
Okay.
bit. First of all, there are, the K-12 budget, much of it is protected under the Constitution and not affected by the across-the-board cuts. And one of the things that we did in the last 2 years with our House Bill 2261 and 2776 was put a few more things that were what I would not consider optional as an education leader, but were actually outside of that box. We actually put them into basic education, which I think was important to make sure that we were protecting those things. There are some stipulations there that, of course, some of that relies on funding, and we've got some issues around funding there. But there certainly are some protections. Our K-12 funding system, you know, when you look at the national statistics and you see that we are not funded as well as we should in K-12, you know, and the budget has been, what, 42% of the budget instead of the 50% or so that it was before. And it actually is a little bit larger percentage of the budget right now, but that's not because we put so much more in education, it's because the other parts of the budget got cut more and, you know, kind of balanced that through. So again, we do have some things to correct there. In the higher ed area, higher ed is a really difficult issue. You know, I worked in K-12 education for many, many years on the school board and for representing all the King County school boards on their state legislative committee and so forth. And I thought, you know, K-12 is very complicated. And then I got to the legislature and I started to learn about and be a part of higher ed, and I said, oh my gosh, you know, K-12 is nothing compared to the higher ed system in terms of how it works and the financing and so forth. So we've got a lot of work to do there. One of the things that I did in 2009 along with my senator at the time was work on bringing a four-year program to Bellevue College to bring access to where the people are, to bring more and different programs than may be offered at our local four-year institutions, and make sure that we were going to have more opportunities for bachelor degrees, because we need to do that. But you know, some of the people can't necessarily say, you know, a mom at 30 years old can't pick up and go to Central Washington University or somewhere else to take up a program because she has other obligations. So this is a way to help bring many of those programs here and to address the needs of the employers in the region and so forth. And that's one of the things that you may have seen. Bellevue Community College is now Bellevue College, which is part of the work that we did. In other areas of higher ed, you know, the tuition issue is hard to deal with. The tuitions are up. I think we've tried to do some of the best work that we can to make sure that we have you know, grants and scholarships and so forth available for many of those students. And then I think what we need to do in a longer term is find a way to stabilize our higher ed financing, to stabilize the funding of our higher ed system so that we can provide those bachelor degrees and graduate degrees to our students who graduate from high school here in Washington. I think that's very, very important. I also believe very strongly in the other work that our research institutions do in both Washington State University and University of Washington with their research and the economic impact that they have to this region in the billions of dollars that come here in jobs and really great opportunities for higher paying jobs. My goal in all of that, of course, is to ensure that our students are a part of that, that our students are getting the opportunities for the higher education and then also the opportunities for those jobs as we grow and keep those jobs here. So.
Well, it looks like we have just a couple, 2-3 more minutes before the allotted 15 minutes elapse. So I see that we have a question over there.
Yes, you mentioned something about K-12 and some of the things that you're putting in there for K-12, but you didn't say what they were.
Okay, sure, to tell you a few things. One I mentioned was the full-day kindergarten. And you know, we've been doing that on a phased-in basis based on at-risk student needs and so forth. And the results of that have been tremendous. I saw some graphs this week of how it's narrowing that gap of student preparedness, where a student who maybe has the background in preschool and whatever other help they have in their K through 5 years, you know, starts out here, and that other student who's the more at-risk student starts out here. And with the full day K, they actually have risen to just about equal point when they go to first grade. And that's helping the at-risk students. It's also helping all of the students because that teacher not having to bring them, bring some of them along further than others. Another thing that we did was develop a prototype school. We also developed the opportunity for 24 credits. There's been a lot of work happening on that recently, and that's basically putting some rigor in and making sure that we're going to have our students prepared for higher education so that they won't need remedial education, and they will be much, much more prepared for whatever choices they're going to move to after high school. Oh gosh, there's a number of, there's some things that are very important to the school district, like things we should have been funding fully before, like their heat, lights, utilities, transportation that we require them to do, and we have not sent the funding along with it. So those pieces are there. We're also continuing to work on some things like the Common Core Standards, which is a national effort to ensure that all students can have the education standards that they need and compete with the world, not just competing state to state here. So that's continuing to happen. We did some work in accountability area to deal with the lowest 5% of our schools. Over time you hear, I remember in 2009 in session we had one school district coming in and telling us, a very small school district, they had 11 seniors, one graduated. That's not acceptable to me at all. And as a former school board director, I'm thinking, okay, so you've got 5 elected school board directors. Each of them could have mentored 1.5 or 2 of those kids and tutored them, and they all should have graduated. It's not acceptable. But when things like that happen, we have some real problems to fix. And those are just some of the pieces. It's a lot more.
And we'll take one last question. Tony?
Hi. Going back to economic development, I think that's a good question, especially as it pertains to minority and women-owned firms. We've been looking at the progress that is being made trying to level the playing field for small businesses. Is legislature taking into consideration, because it's always listed as one of the top priorities, improving access to capital?
Mm-hmm.
But when we talk about access to capital, studies have shown that the average wealth for a Black family is around $5,500. The average wealth for Hispanic families is around $7,800. And banks these days, especially, are focused on liquid collateral lenders. So it automatically will put those ethnic groups behind their ability to access capital, which is key. Cash flow is key to successful business enterprise. Is there going to be any consideration or special provisions given to those groups? Because when we look at leveling the playing field for all businesses, there are still some historical factors that negatively impact specific ethnic groups. Will that be given consideration?
I know it's on the top of my mind as a former credit grantor and banker myself, and someone who is definitely supportive of small businesses in my communities, very, very supportive, and a small business owner. I know that there are legislators who are talking about legislation for a state bank that might be helpful in that area. I know anytime I'm talking to bankers, I'm always urging them as strong as I can to get out there with their funds, to get out there and be a part of helping our businesses grow and so forth. I think we try and do some things in helping to help businesses get started on the right foot and be educated and trained and have access and so forth so that they can succeed. But it is a problem, and I think for me, I'm open to what ideas you're going to have and how we can work together to make that happen.
Let me transition here and just close by asking you a question, Marcie. Do you know what happened to the legislation in the last session concerning the state bank? Was that actually proposed?
No.
Wasn't proposed?
But there's well, actually, I think it was like on the last day or so, as a preparation for this session. Yes.
So it might have
It's
some
Zach
basis.
Hudgens has that, and I don't know who has it in the Senate.
Was that Hasagawa?
Yeah, Representative Hasagawa is planning on introducing the bill